It was a freezing night in February 1991, when 22-year-old Tammy Engstrom left a small-town Ohio bar and vanished. She had only gone out for a few drinks with friends, but when a stranger offered her a ride home, she accepted, never realizing she was stepping into the car of a killer. His name was Kenneth Louis Biros, a man with a calm face, polite manners, and a darkness buried just beneath the surface. That night, his obsession and rage took control. Somewhere along a lonely back road, Tammy's laughter turned into screams. She fought back, but Biros was stronger. He beat her, strangled her, and then, in a horrifying act meant to erase his crime, he dismembered her body and scattered the pieces across 2 states. For days, police searched fields, woods, and creeks for any sign of the missing woman. What they found would haunt Ohio forever. Biros didn't just kill, he planned, he hid, and he lied. But in the end, the evidence caught up with him: blood in his car, his confession, and the chilling precision of his cover-up. This is the story of Kenneth Biros, the man who turned a simple ride home into a nightmare, and how his execution would change the history of the American death penalty forever. Classification: murderer. Characteristics: mutilator. Disemboweling: number of victims. Date of murder: February 7, 1991. Date of arrest: 2 days after date of birth, June 24, 1958. Victim profile: Tammy Engstrom, female, 22. Method of murder: strangulation. Location: Trumbull County, Ohio. USA. Status: executed by lethal injection in Ohio on December 8, 2009. 2-year-old Tammy Engstrom met Biros at the Nickelodeon Lounge in Masbury, Ohio. She had gone there to socialize with her uncle and became so intoxicated she passed out in her chair. As the bar was closing, her uncle took her keys from her, and Biros volunteered to take Tammy for coffee to help sober her up. Biros and Tammy left the Nickelodeon in Biros's car, and her uncle remained at the bar after closing and waited for Biros to return with Tammy. However, neither Biros nor Tammy ever returned. When Tammy did not come home that night, the police were called. Biros told the police and Tammy's family that she had freaked out in his car, and she jumped out and ran through yards, and he could not catch her. He later told police that he touched her leg, and she fell out and hit her head on the railroad tracks. After consulting with counsel, Biros showed police the location of Tammy's body, which had been dismembered, eviscerated, and buried in 2 different counties in Pennsylvania. Tammy's head and right breast had been severed from her torso. Her right leg had been amputated just above the knee. The body was completely naked, except for what appeared to be remnants of black leg stockings that had been purposely rolled down to the victim's feet or ankles. The torso had been cut open, and the abdominal cavity was partially eviscerated. The anus, rectum, and all but a small portion of her sexual organs had been removed from the body and were never recovered by police. The cause of death was strangulation. At trial, Biros denied admitting to the murder and testified that Tammy had jumped out and fled from the vehicle. He followed and inadvertently struck her. Biros denied having had any sexual intentions toward Tammy, but admitted cutting out her vagina and rectum 30 to 45 minutes after he killed her. The medical examiner testified that there were 91 separate cutting or slashing wounds on the recovered body. Ohio executes inmate with untried injection method, 2 decatozen. Columbus, Ohio. Reuters. Ohio put to death a convicted killer on Tuesday with a single dose of a lethal chemical, the first time the method has been used in the United States. Kenneth Biros, 51, convicted of the 1991 murder of a woman, was pronounced dead 9 minutes after receiving an injection of the anesthetic sodium thiopental at the Southern Ohio Correction Facility in Lucasville, a prison spokeswoman said. Prison spokeswoman Julie Walburn said the execution proceeded without any problems. Executioners, however, made 9 attempts before finding a vein to inject Biros with the drug commonly known as sodium pentothal. "Sorry from the bottom of my heart," Biros said in the death chamber before the execution was carried out. Witnesses said he blinked a few times and then appeared dead. Ohio's new method replaced a faster-acting 3-drug cocktail commonly used in the United States and was put in place to try to end a lawsuit that charged the cocktail, which also starts with sodium pentothal, could cause pain. Ohio's method is similar to how animals are euthanized. Biros' lawyer called the untested process experimentation, but courts rejected the inmates' appeals. New protocol. Executions were temporarily put on hold in Ohio in September after executioners tried unsuccessfully for 2 hours to find a suitable vein to inject inmate Rommel Broom, jabbing him repeatedly. Broom remains on death row. Under the new protocol, if a suitable vein is not located for the single injection, executioners will inject 2 potent painkillers, hydromorphone and midazolam, into the muscles of the inmate's arm, leg, or buttocks. The 2 drugs administered in high doses halt breathing. Fordham University law professor Deborah Deno, an expert on lethal injection, said there were serious problems with the new single-drug method, including the difficulties executioners can have finding a vein. She said the backup plan could lead to a slow, lingering death, with the inmate in a state of confusion, disorientation, and intense psychological anguish and torment. An unofficial 7-month moratorium on U.S. executions ended in April 2008, when the U.S. Supreme Court ruled lethal injection was not cruel and unusual punishment. The 3-drug method employs a sedative to cause unconsciousness, a second drug to paralyze the body, and a third to stop the heart. The execution marked the second time in 3 years Ohio has revised the method. Lethal injection was questioned in 2006 after a man who was supposed to be unconscious suddenly struggled and said the drugs were not working. Ohio then created a set-to-die revision requiring the warden to call out the condemned man's name and shake and pinch his shoulder to ensure unconsciousness after the sedative was administered. Biros was the 51st person executed in the United States in 2009, and the 5th in Ohio this year. He was convicted of strangling to death Tammy Engstrom, 22, to whom he had offered a ride from a bar. Biros also raped, beat, and stabbed his victim 91 times before disemboweling her and scattering the body parts across 2 states. Biros requested a last meal of cheese pizza onion rings and fried mushrooms, chips with French onion olive, cherry pie, blueberry ice cream, and a Dr. Pepper soft drink. Killer executed using single drug, Wednesday, December 9, 2009, Lucasville, Ohio. In the last night and morning of his life, Kenneth Biros drank cup after cup of water, 12 in all, perhaps hoping to ensure that he was hydrated so that his executioners could more easily access his veins to kill him. Whether the extra water had anything to do with it or not, Biros died quietly at 11:47 a.m. yesterday, about 10 minutes after a single large dose of thiopental sodium, a powerful anesthetic, flowed into his left arm. He is the first person in U.S. history to be put to death using a single drug. Ohio Prisons Director Terry Collins said afterward that there were no problems whatsoever with Ohio's new 1-drug method. The process worked as expected. John Parker, one of Biros' attorneys, said Biros was concerned, but not afraid of being the first person to undergo the single drug execution protocol. He was very much at peace with his inner self. Prison officials did not have to rely on a new backup method involving large doses of 2 high-potency painkillers injected directly into muscles on the inmate's arms, legs, or buttocks. "I am sorry from the bottom of my heart," the Trumbull County killer said in a final statement, as he lay strapped to the lethal injection table in the death house at the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility. "Now I am paroled to my Father in heaven, and I will spend all my holidays with my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ," said Biros, 51. "Peace be with you all." Biros' death was too peaceful for family members of Tammy Engstrom. The 22-year-old woman whom Biros raped, stabbed dozens of times, beheaded and eviscerated after taking her home from a bar on Feb. 7, 1991. "I myself think it went too smooth," said Debbie Heiss Engstrom's sister, and one of 3 family members to witness the execution. "I think he should have gone through some pain for what he did. This is my happy day that I was here to see this execution," said Mary Jane Heiss, the victim's mother. She watched Biros die from her wheelchair while hooked up to an oxygen tank because of lung disease. "I'm just glad the state of Ohio came up with the procedure," said Tom Heiss, the dead woman's brother. "I have no thoughts for him. I'm glad he's gone. It brought some closure to our family." The Heiss family applauded briefly after Biros' death was announced. Parker said, after witnessing the execution, that he still has major concerns about the intravenous access issue. He said he counted 9 times that prison medical technicians tried before gaining access for a single IV line in Biros' left arm. They were unable to start a line in his right arm. Parker and co-counsel Timothy Sweeney argued unsuccessfully in the courts that the execution should be stopped because it involved experimentation on human beings using untried and untested procedures. The 35 other states with death penalty laws use a 3-drug protocol, which Ohio abandoned after an execution attempt failed nearly 3 months ago. The U.S. Supreme Court rejected Biros' final appeal shortly before 10 a.m. yesterday, forcing a 1-hour delay in the execution. The new protocol was unveiled November 13, 2 months after the execution of Ramel Broom was halted, when medical technicians spent 2 hours trying in vain to attach IV lines. Broom has gone to federal court to challenge the state's right to try to execute him a second time. Biros was the 4th person to be executed in Ohio this year, and the 33rd to die since the state resumed capital punishment in 1999. Ohio executes inmate with 1 drug injection Tuesday, December 8, 2009. Lucasville, Ohio. An Ohio killer was put to death in an efficient 10 minutes Tuesday in the first U.S. execution to use a single drug injection instead of the standard 3-chemical combination that has come under legal attack because it can cause excruciating pain. Kenneth Biros, 51, was pronounced dead shortly after 1 dose of sodium thiopental began flowing into his veins at the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility. The U.S. Supreme Court had rejected his final appeal 2 hours earlier. Experts had predicted that sodium thiopental, used in many parts of the world to put pets down, would take longer to kill than the old method. But the 10 minutes it took Biros to die was about as long as it has taken other inmates in Ohio and elsewhere to succumb to the 3-drug combination. The mother, sister, and brother of Biros' victim, Tammy Engstrom, applauded as the warden announced the time of death. "Rock on," Debbie Heiss Engstrom's sister said a moment earlier as the curtains were drawn for the coroner to check on Biros. "That was too easy." Ohio's switch to 1 drug was born of a botched execution attempt on another inmate in September. But critics of the 3-drug method have long argued that it amounts to cruel and unusual punishment in violation of the U.S. Constitution, because it can subject the condemned to extreme pain while leaving them immobile and unable to cry out. The 3-drug method consists of sodium thiopental, a common anesthetic, along with pancuronium bromide, which paralyzes muscles, and potassium chloride, which stops the heart. The single drug technique amounts to an overdose of the anesthetic, a method that injection experts and defense attorneys agreed would not cause pain. Biros executioners struggled for several minutes to find suitable veins, inserting needles repeatedly in both arms before completing the process on just his left arm. He winced once, and his attorney John Parker said he was concerned by all the needle sticks. But prison officials declared nothing amiss. There was no problem with anything in us carrying out the law of this state. In this particular execution, none whatsoever. Ohio Prisons Director Terry Collins said, "The process worked as we said it would work." After the chemical started flowing, Biros' chest heaved several times, and he moved his head twice over a span of about 2 minutes before he lay perfectly still. In 2008, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld lethal injection in a case from Kentucky involving a 3-drug method similar to the one used in Ohio and practically every other death penalty state. After a 7-month moratorium on the death penalty, while the High Court decided the case, executions resumed across the country. In its ruling, the Supreme Court said states would have to change from the 3-drug process if an alternative method lessened the possibility of pain. Deborah Deno, a law professor at New York's Fordham University and a lethal injection expert, said she is highly skeptical that Ohio's single experience Tuesday will change the landscape around the country. She noted that the Supreme Court questioned the 1-drug method, with Chief Justice John Roberts saying it has problems of its own. All 36 death penalty states use lethal injection, and 30 rely on the 3-drug method. Nebraska, which recently adopted injection over the electric chair, has proposed the 3-drug method, but hasn't yet adopted it. Kentucky, Florida, South Carolina, Texas, and Virginia are among those that have said they will keep the 3-drug method. Sodium thiopental is a barbiturate often used to anesthetize surgical patients, induce medical comas, or help desperately ill people commit suicide. It is also sometimes used to euthanize animals. It kills by suppressing breathing. Ohio switched to sodium thiopental after a failed attempt to execute Romil Broom in September. Executioners tried for 2 hours to find a suitable vein hitting bone and muscle in as many as 18 needle sticks. A hearing begins in federal court Wednesday on Broom's attempt to block the state from trying again. After the botched attempt, the state consulted with an array of experts, including pharmacologists, pharmacists, coroners, and an anesthesiologist, with 2 goals: to end a 5-year-old lawsuit claiming that Ohio's 3-drug system is capable of causing severe pain, and to create a backup procedure if the first one didn't work. That backup plan, also untested on U.S. inmates, allows a 2-drug injection into muscle if a usable vein cannot be found. That did not become necessary in Biros' case. Biros killed his 22-year-old victim in 1991 after offering to drive her home from a bar, then scattered her body parts in Ohio and Pennsylvania. Before dying Tuesday, he apologized for his crime. "I'm being paroled to my Father in heaven," Biros said. "I will now spend all of my holidays with my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ." Ohio killer is first in nation to be executed by single drug injection. December 9, 2009, Lucasville, Ohio. In the last night and morning of his life, Kenneth Biros drank cup after cup of water, 12 in all, perhaps hoping to ensure that he was hydrated, so his executioners could access his veins to kill him. Whether or not the extra water helped, Biros died quietly at 8:47 a.m. Yesterday, about 10 minutes after a large dose of sodium thiopental, a powerful anesthetic flowed into his left arm. He is the first death row inmate in U.S. history to be executed using a single drug. Ohio Prisons Director Terry Collins said later that there were no problems whatsoever with Ohio's new 1-drug method. The process worked as expected. Experts had predicted that sodium thiopental, used in many parts of the world to put pets down, would take longer to kill than the other method. But the 10 minutes it took Biros to die was about as long as it has taken other inmates in Ohio and elsewhere to succumb to the commonly used 3-drug combination. After the chemical began to flow, his chest heaved several times, and he moved his head twice over a span of about 2 minutes. Then he lay still. John Parker, one of Biros' attorneys, said Biros was concerned, but not afraid of being the first person to undergo the single-drug execution protocol. He was very much at peace with his inner self, he said. Prison officials did not have to rely on a new backup method involving large doses of 2 high-potency painkillers injected directly into muscles on the inmate's arms, legs, or buttocks. "I am sorry from the bottom of my heart," the Trumbull County killer said in a final statement as he lay strapped to the table in the death house at the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility. "Now I am paroled to my Father in heaven, and I will spend all my holidays with my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ," said Biros, 51. "Peace be with you all." Biros' death was too peaceful for family members of Tammy Engstrom. The 22-year-old woman whom Biros raped, stabbed dozens of times, beheaded, and eviscerated after taking her home from a bar on Feb. 7, 1991. "I myself think it went too smooth," said Debbie Heiss, Ms. Engstrom's sister, and one of 3 family members to witness the execution. "I think he should have gone through some pain for what he did. This is my happy day that I was here to see this execution," said Mary Jane Heiss, the victim's mother. She watched Biros die from her wheelchair. "I'm just glad the state of Ohio came up with the procedure," said Tom Heiss, the dead woman's brother. "I have no thoughts for him. I'm glad he's gone. It brought some closure to our family." Mr. Parker said, after witnessing the execution, that he still has major concerns about the intravenous access issue. He said he counted 9 times prison medical technicians tried before gaining access for a single IV line in Biros' left arm. They were unable to start a line in his right arm. Mr. Parker and co-counsel Timothy Sweeney argued unsuccessfully in the courts that the execution should be stopped because it involved experimentation on humans using untried and untested procedures. The 35 other states with the death penalty use a 3-drug system, which Ohio dropped after an execution failed nearly 3 months ago. The 3-drug method uses sodium thiopental, a common anesthetic, with pancuronium bromide, which paralyzes muscles, and potassium chloride, which stops the heart. The new method amounts to an overdose of the anesthetic, and injection experts and defense attorneys agreed it would not cause pain. The U.S. Supreme Court rejected Biros' final appeal shortly before 10 a.m. yesterday, forcing a 1-hour delay in the execution. The new protocol was announced November 13, 2 months after the execution of Ramel Broom was halted, when technicians spent 2 hours trying to attach IV lines. He is challenging Ohio's right to try to execute him a second time. Biros was the 4th person to be executed in Ohio this year, and the 33rd to die since capital punishment resumed in 1999. Kenneth Biros becomes first inmate executed using single-drug method, December 08, 2009, Lucasville, Ohio. With the national spotlight on Ohio's untested lethal injection procedures, officials were satisfied with Tuesday's largely uneventful execution of Kenneth Biros. "I think we far exceeded what our critics have been saying about us," Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections Director Terry Collins said after the execution. "The process worked as we expected, and we knew that this process would work, did work, and we will continue to use this process as we move forward in carrying out the law of the state of Ohio." At 11:47 a.m., Biros became the first person in American history to be executed with a single-drug procedure instead of the 3-drug cocktail previously used in Ohio, the method employed by every other state that has carried out capital punishment through lethal injection. The 51-year-old Trumbull County man was pronounced dead about 9 minutes after being injected in the left arm with thiopental sodium, roughly the amount of time it usually takes for the 3-drug cocktail to work. The drug used on Biros is a sedative typically used in smaller dosages by veterinarians to euthanize animals, but it wasn't clear how long it would take to act on a human. However, the execution team struggled to put shunts in Biros' arms to inject the drugs. Biros grimaced as it took about 30 minutes of pricking the condemned man at least a half-dozen times to find a usable vein. John Parker, an attorney for Biros, who witnessed the execution, said he counted 9 attempts. Once the drugs started flowing, I think it went well, but I very much have concerns with the IV access, Parker said. Collins bristled at the notion that anything went wrong in finding a vein. People who like to put time limits on my team, it's not an acceptable practice, Collins said sternly. I see no problem in any form or fashion in what my team did today. Struggles by Ohio's execution teams to find suitable veins in other recent executions and attempts, including in September when Governor Ted Strickland was forced to step in and stop attempts to execute Cleveland's Ramel Broom, drew national scrutiny and legal trouble for Ohio. Biros was sent to death row in 1991 for killing and dismembering 22-year-old Tammy Engstrom, leaving her body parts scattered in parts of Ohio and Pennsylvania. Engstrom's mother, sister, and brother witnessed Biros' execution and clapped after the warden announced the time of death. Engstrom's mother, Mary Jane Heiss, said after the execution that Tuesday was one of the happiest days of my life. Biros had 2 spiritual advisors and an attorney present to represent him. As he lay strapped to the execution table, Biros was allowed to make one final remorseful statement. I'm sorry from the bottom of my heart, and I want to thank my friends and family that helped me and supported me and believed in me, he said. Now I'm being paroled to my Father in heaven and get to spend all of my holidays with my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Peace be with you all, men. A white scarf was laid next to Biros at his request, apparently as a symbol from Buddhism, one of the faiths that he observed. He also had 2 small Eastern Orthodox religious pictures lying on his chest, tucked inside a strap, holding him down on the table as he faced the ceiling. Biros had little outward reaction once the drugs began flowing into his body. His chest heaved in a series of rapid movements, and then he lay still. Kenneth Biros, on 2791 Biros, murdered 22-year-old Tammy Engstrom in Brookfield Township. Tammy had met Biros that night at the Nickelodeon Lounge in Masbury, Ohio. Biros beat and stabbed Tammy Engstrom 91 times in an attempt at sexual mutilation and then strangled her to death. Biros also stole Tammy's diamond ring. Biros later showed police where he had hidden Tammy's severed nude body in Pennsylvania. On Thursday, February 7, 1991, at approximately 5:30 p.m., Tammy Engstrom dropped off her 1-year-old son at her friend's house before reporting to work at the Clover Bar in Hubbard, Ohio. Tammy's mother worked with Tammy at the Clover Bar. Tammy arrived at work at 6:30 p.m. Later, at approximately 9:30 p.m., Tammy had to leave work due to illness. Tammy's mother relieved Tammy so that she could go home early. However, instead of going directly home, Tammy drove to the Nickelodeon Lounge in Masbury, Ohio, to visit her uncle, who was a regular patron at that tavern. Tammy arrived at the Nickelodeon at approximately 10:00 p.m. She was wearing a black leather coat, a sweater, black pants, black shoes, black stockings or socks, and a $1 and $200 diamond cluster ring she had purchased from a friend a few weeks earlier. She was also carrying a small gray purse, which according to one witness contained a significant amount of money. At the Nickelodeon, Tammy had several drinks and spoke with her uncle and others. Kenneth Biros arrived at the Nickelodeon at approximately 11:00 p.m., having earlier participated in a drinking event sponsored by the Nickelodeon and other bars. Biros knew Tammy's uncle, but was a stranger to Tammy. By midnight, Tammy had passed out due to either sickness or intoxication while seated at a table. She later fell off her chair and onto the floor. Her uncle and Biros helped Tammy back into her seat. At approximately 1:00 a.m. When the bar was closing, Biros and her uncle assisted Tammy outside to the parking lot. Tammy insisted on driving herself home, but her uncle took Tammy's car keys upon determining that she was too intoxicated to drive. According to her uncle, Biros then volunteered to take Tammy for coffee to help sober her up. Tammy's uncle handed Tammy her purse and noticed that she was wearing her leather coat. At approximately 1:15 a.m., Biros and Tammy left the Nickelodeon in Biros's car. Tammy's uncle remained at the bar after closing and waited for Biros to return with Tammy. However, Biros never returned Tammy to the Nickelodeon. Meanwhile, on February 7th at approximately 11:30 p.m., Tammy's husband, Andy, went to the Clover Bar to deliver a gift he had bought for Tammy. However, Tammy's mother informed Andy that Tammy had left work and had gone home sick. Andy drove home and discovered that Tammy was not there. Andy then asked the babysitter to continue watching Casey while he went out to search for Tammy. At approximately 1:00 a.m., Andy spoke with Tammy's sister, who suggested that Tammy might have gone to the Nickelodeon. At 1:10 a.m., Andy called the Nickelodeon and was told that Tammy and her uncle had already left the bar. Andy then went to sleep, assuming that Tammy would soon return home. When he awoke later that morning, he discovered that Tammy was still missing. On Friday, February 8, 1991, or about noon, Andy and a friend went to the Nickelodeon to pick up Tammy's car, which had been left there overnight. At some point, Andy learned that Biros had been the last person seen with Tammy. Therefore, Andy drove to Biros's home and confronted Biros concerning Tammy's whereabouts. Biros told Andy that after he and Tammy had left the Nickelodeon to get coffee, he tapped her on the shoulder, and she freaked out, got out of the car, and started running through these people's yards on Davis Street in Sharon, Pennsylvania. The location where Biros claimed that Tammy had jumped from the vehicle was approximately 3/10 of a mile from the Nickelodeon. Andy told Biros that he had already contacted the police in Sharon, Pennsylvania, and that he intended to file a missing persons report with the Brookfield Township, Ohio Police Department. Andy told Biros that if she don't turn up right fast, they are going to come looking for you, and it's going to be your ass. Throughout the day on Friday of February 8th, Biros told a number of witnesses similar stories concerning Tammy's disappearance. Specifically, he told Tammy's mother, Tammy's brother, Tammy's uncles, her friends, acquaintances, and others, that after he had left the Nickelodeon with Tammy, she woke up, became frightened, jumped from his vehicle, and ran between houses near Carpenter's Towing or Carpenter's Garage on Davis Street in Sharon, Pennsylvania. Biros also indicated that he had initially chased after Tammy, but that he had been unable to catch her. Biros told a number of these witnesses that he had abandoned the chase to avoid being caught while driving under the influence of alcohol. Several of the witnesses noticed fresh cuts or scratches on Biros's hands and a fresh wound over his right eye that had not been present the night before. Biros explained that he had cut his hands because he had been locked out of his house and had to break a window, and that he had obtained the cut above his eye while chopping wood. Tammy's brother threatened to kill Biros if Tammy had been hurt in any way. One of Tammy's uncles told Biros that if Tammy had been hurt, he would rip your heart out. Tammy's mother told Biros, "If you put one scratch on my daughter, I will kill you." Biros tried to comfort her by telling her, "Don't worry, your daughter is going to be just fine. You wait and see." On Friday evening, Biros helped Tammy's relatives search the area in Sharon, Pennsylvania, where he claimed to have last seen Tammy. Biros lived on King Graves Road in Brookfield Township, Ohio, with his mother and his brother. On Friday morning, February 8th, Biros' mother found a gold ring on the bathroom floor. The next day, she asked Biros if he knew anything about the ring. Biros claimed to know nothing about it. Biros told his mother that the ring appeared to be made of cheap gold. When Biros' mother responded that the ring was not cheap, Biros suggested that perhaps it had belonged to the girl who jumped out of his car early Friday morning. Biros then took the ring and said that he would return it to the Nickelodeon. However, Biros never returned Tammy's ring to the Nickelodeon. Rather, according to Biros, he hid the ring in the ceiling of his house. On Friday night, Biros' brother was at home watching television, while Biros was outside in a pasture behind the house. He went outside and called to Biros to see what he was doing. Biros responded that he was watching stars. His brother then returned to the house and retired for the evening. On Saturday, the February 9th, Tammy's family and friends spent hours searching for Tammy in Sharon, Pennsylvania. They also searched a wooded area along the railroad tracks near Biros' home on King Graves Road. However, the search party was unable to uncover any clues concerning Tammy's disappearance. On Saturday afternoon, police called Biros' home and left a message requesting that he come to the police station for questioning. After receiving the message, Biros drove to the police station to discuss Tammy's disappearance with Brookfield Township and Sharon, Pennsylvania police officers. Police informed Biros that he was not under arrest and that he was free to leave at any time. During questioning, Biros reiterated the same basic story that he had previously told Tammy's friends and relatives. Specifically, Biros told police that he had left the Nickelodeon with Tammy in the early morning hours of February 8th to get coffee or food at some location in Sharon, Pennsylvania. Biros claimed that Tammy had passed out in his vehicle after they left the Nickelodeon. Biros told police that he stopped at an automated teller machine to withdraw some money. And at that point, Tammy woke up and insisted that Biros drive her back to the Nickelodeon. Biros told police that as he was driving on Davis Street in Sharon, Pennsylvania, Tammy jumped from the vehicle and ran away. When asked whether Tammy's purse might have been left in his vehicle, Biros responded that he had thoroughly cleaned the vehicle and had found no purse. At some point during the interview, Captain John Clarick of the Sharon Police Department began questioning Biros' version of the story. Clarick suggested to Biros that perhaps Biros had made some sexual advance toward Tammy, which in turn may have caused her to jump from the vehicle. Biros denied making any sexual advances. Clarick also suggested that perhaps Biros had made some sexual advance and that Tammy had jumped from the car and struck her head. Biros denied this as well. Upon further questioning, Clarick suggested that maybe an accident had occurred in which Tammy had fallen out of the car and struck her head. At that point, Biros responded, yes, and admitted that he had done something very bad. Clarick offered to speak with Biros alone. Biros agreed and indicated that he wanted to speak with Clarick outside the presence of other police officers. According to Clarick, after the other officers had left the room, Biros stated, "It's like you said, we were in the car together. We were out along the railroad tracks. I touched her on the hand. Then I went further. I either touched or felt her leg. She pushed my hand away. The car wasn't quite stopped. She opened the door and fell and struck her head on the tracks." Biros told Clarick that Tammy was dead and that the incident had occurred along the railroad tracks near King Graves Road in Brookfield Township. At that time, police informed Biros of his Miranda rights. After signing a written waiver of his Miranda rights, Biros repeated his story in the presence of Detective Rocky Fonts of the Brookfield Township Police Department. According to Fonts, Biros admitted that he had reached out and grabbed Tammy while parked along the railroad tracks near his house on King Graves Road. Biros told Fonts that Tammy had then jumped out of the vehicle, struck her head on the metal part of the railroad track, and died. Biros told police that Tammy's body was in Pennsylvania. When police asked Biros for the precise location of the body, Biros requested to speak with an attorney. After Biros consulted with counsel, he agreed to show police the location of Tammy's body. In the early morning hours of Sunday, February 10, 1991, Pennsylvania and Ohio authorities discovered several of Tammy's severed body parts in a desolate wooded area of Butler County, Pennsylvania. Police found other portions of Tammy's body in a desolate wooded area of Venango County, Pennsylvania, approximately 30 miles north of the Butler site. Tammy's head and right breast had been severed from her torso. Her right leg had been amputated just above the knee. The body was completely naked, except for what appeared to be remnants of black leg stockings that had been purposely rolled down to the victim's feet or ankles. The torso had been cut open, and the abdominal cavity was partially eviscerated. The anus, rectum, and all but a small portion of her sexual organs had been removed from the body and were never recovered by police. Forensic technicians, police, and homicide investigators searched the area of the railroad tracks near King Graves Road, where Biros had indicated that the incident with Tammy occurred. There, investigators discovered a large area of blood-stained gravel near the railroad tracks. Investigators also found blood spatters on the side of one of the steel tracks. A number of other bloodstains were found in the same general area. Bloodstains and swabbings of blood collected at the scene were later tested and were found to be consistent with Tammy's blood. Additionally, investigators found what appeared to be part of the victim's intestines in a swampy area near the railroad tracks. DNA testing revealed that the intestines were in fact part of Tammy's remains. Approximately 1 month later, police recovered Tammy's black leather coat, which was found partially buried a short distance from the tracks. 2 cuts or slash marks were found on or near the collar of the coat. Tammy's house keys and a tube of lipstick were found in a shallow hole in close proximity to the coat. Police also found one of Tammy's black leather shoes in the area of the railroad tracks. Dale Lowe, a forensic scientist with the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Identification and Investigation, found a single pubic hair inside Tammy's shoe. Locke determined that the microscopic characteristics of that hair were consistent with the characteristics of known samples of Tammy's pubic hair. Police also recovered a number of items during searches of Biros' residence. Investigators found a blood-stained pocket knife hidden in Biros' basement. A much larger knife was recovered from Biros' bathroom. Investigators also recovered a blood-stained coat from Biros' bedroom, which was later identified as the coat Biros had worn to the Nickelodeon. Forensic experts found numerous bloodstains on the front of the coat and blood spatters inside the left sleeve. Bloodstains from Biros' pocket knife and coat were later tested and were found to be consistent with the blood of the victim. Additionally, authorities removed a pair of size 11 tennis shoes from a bedroom in Biros' home. A forensic scientist in the trace evidence section of the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Identification and Investigation found a single hair embedded in a seam near the tread of one shoe. He compared the hair to known samples of hair from the victim's head and testified the hair from the tennis shoe was microscopically consistent with the known samples of hair from the victim's head. The automobile Biros had driven to the Brookfield Township Police Department was also searched. Forensic technicians found numerous bloodstains consistent with the blood of the victim. Several other bloodstains found in the vehicle were determined to be consistent with Biros' blood. A small piece of human tissue believed to be Tammy's liver tissue was found inside the trunk. Dr. William A. Cox, the Summit County coroner, performed the autopsy of Tammy's body. Cox testified that he was board-certified in anatomic pathology, clinical pathology, forensic pathology, and neuropathology. Cox determined that Tammy had suffered 91 pre-mortem injuries, which were indicative of a severe beating and an attempt at sexual mutilation. He also found 5 stab wounds that had been inflicted immediately after the victim's death. Among the pre-mortem wounds were at least 5 blunt force injuries on the top of the victim's head, which, according to Cox, had been caused by an object such as fists or the handle of a knife. Other pre-mortem wounds were found on the victim's breasts and in the area of her groin. 2 pre-mortem knife wounds were discovered near the nipple of the right breast. There were fine linear scratches and a pre-mortem knife laceration, or incised wound, along the victim's face. And according to Cox, the way that is done is the blade of the knife runs down across the mouth and finally gets into the skin, into the soft tissues, then breaks the skin as it continues in the downward direction. Cox also found numerous wounds on the victim's hands, which appeared to be defensive injuries. In addition to the 91 pre-mortem wounds and the 5 post-mortem stab wounds, Tammy's head right breast and right lower extremity had been severed from her body at some point after death. Her anus, rectum, urinary bladder, and virtually all of her sexual organs had been cut out and were never found. The gallbladder, the right lobe of the liver, and portions of the bowels had been extracted from her body. According to Cox, a pocket knife like the one removed from Biros' basement could have been used to inflict some of the wounds found on Tammy's body. However, Cox found that a much larger or heavier knife had been used to amputate Tammy's head and right lower extremity. Cox testified that the victim's right femur had been severed by a sharp knife, which had left a fine linear cut in the bone. Cox specifically determined that the evidence indicated that the femur had not been fractured by any blunt force trauma or as the result of an automobile accident. Cox testified that the knife recovered from Biros' bathroom was consistent with the type of knife that had been used to accomplish the amputations. Cox found that the dismemberment and eviscerations all occurred within minutes after the killer had inflicted the 5 post-mortem stab wounds. He found no evidence that the victim had been struck by an automobile, as Biros would later claim. With respect to Tammy's cause of death, Cox concluded that the victim had died of asphyxia due to strangulation. According to Cox, the victim had been strangled to death over a period of 4 to 5 minutes. The mucosal lining of the esophagus was torn, indicating that there was a degree of retching and vomiting during this period. Cox testified that in his opinion, the victim had not been asphyxiated by a hand placed over the nose and mouth. An examination of the victim's oral cavity revealed no signs of injury to the tongue or the delicate tissue inside the mouth. Absent such injuries, Cox found no evidence to support the theory that the victim had been forcibly suffocated, as opposed to being strangled to death. Further, the hyoid bone had been fractured, and there was injury to adjacent tissue, which supported the finding that the victim had been strangled. According to Cox, Tammy was severely beaten, strangled to death, and then stabbed 5 times. The 5 post-mortem stab wounds had occurred within minutes after death. Later, but still within minutes, Tammy's body was dismembered. At trial, Biros testified in his own defense. Biros claimed that when the Nickelodeon Lounge was closing at 1 a.m., February 8th, Tammy's uncle asked Biros to take Tammy for coffee or breakfast to help sober her up. Biros agreed and left the Nickelodeon with Tammy. He then drove into nearby Sharon, Pennsylvania, to withdraw cash from an automated teller machine. At some point, Biros reached over and shook Tammy since she had fallen asleep. Tammy awoke and said that she wanted to go home. She told Biros that her home was in Hubbard, Ohio, but would not say exactly where she lived. Therefore, Biros decided to take Tammy to his home to let her sleep it off. Biros testified that he decided on his way home to drive along the gravel railroad bed, which would have taken him to within a few hundred feet of his residence on King Graves Road. While driving on the railroad bed, he reached over and grabbed Tammy's hand to wake her, according to Biros. Tommy suddenly awoke, looked at him, and began yelling, "I don't know you! Where are we at?" She hit Biros and yelled at him. Biros forcibly struck Tammy with his forearm. Tammy then fled from the vehicle and took off running along the railroad tracks. Biros claimed that he drove along the railroad tracks to try to head Tammy off to speak with her. However, according to Biros, he inadvertently struck Tammy, with the vehicle causing her to topple over the car at a 45-degree angle, with her head positioned toward the gravel railroad bed. Biros testified that he got out of the car and rolled Tammy over onto her back. She was bleeding, and her head was positioned against the steel rail of the railroad track. According to Biros, Tommy pushed him and began screaming, swearing, and throwing rocks. At that point, Biros decided to pull out his pocket knife to calm Tammy down. However, Tammy grabbed the knife, and a struggle ensued. Biros cut his hand, but was able to regain control of the knife. Meanwhile, Tammy continued to scream. Therefore, according to Biros, he pinned Tammy down and placed his hand over her mouth until she stopped struggling. When Biros removed his hand from Tammy's mouth, he realized that she had died. Biros then became upset and frustrated, so he stabbed her several times. Biros testified that after he had killed and stabbed Tammy, he panicked, drove home, tended to his wounds, and washed his clothes. Biros testified that he returned to the body 15 to 20 minutes later and became very angry, believing that Tammy had just destroyed my life. At that point, Biros took his pocket knife and began cutting Tammy's body. Biros claimed that he removed Tammy's clothes because they were in the way. Next, according to Biros, he dragged the body some distance into the woods and felt Tammy's ring cutting into his left hand. Thus, he removed the ring and placed it in his pocket. Biros testified that he attempted to bury Tammy's body in a shallow hole in the ground, but that the body would not fit into the hole. Therefore, he amputated the head and leg with his pocket knife and placed those body parts in a separate hole. Biros then placed Tammy's clothes in other holes in the ground. After burying the body, Biros returned home. Biros testified that later on Friday morning, February 8, 1991, he found Tammy's purse in his car and burned the purse in the fireplace. He then washed his car. On Friday night, Biros decided to move the body since he had been confronted and threatened by Tammy's relatives. Late that night, while his brother was watching television, Biros retrieved Tammy's body parts, loaded them into the car, and drove to Pennsylvania and disposed of the body. Biros lied to police, to Tammy's relatives, and to his own mother. At trial, Biros denied telling police at the Brookfield Township Police Department that while Biros and Tammy were seated in the car, Biros had placed his hand on Tammy's hand, and then went further and touched or felt her leg. Biros denied having had any sexual intentions toward Tammy, but admitted cutting out her vagina and rectum 30 to 45 minutes after he killed her. Biros was able to recall some of the most minute details of the night in question, but was unable to remember where he had disposed of Tammy's anus rectum and sexual organs. He also denied having had any intention of stealing Tammy's property, but he admitted burying her clothes, taking her ring, and burning her purse. Additionally, Biros admitted lying to his mother about Tammy's ring and later hiding that ring in the ceiling of his house. Biros testified that he had no intention to kill or harm Tammy on the night in question. He testified further that he never struck Tammy with his fists or with the blunt end of a knife. Dr. Carl Williams, a forensic pathologist, testified for the defense. Williams was not present during Tammy's autopsy and never personally examined the body. Williams based his opinions upon a review of, among other things, Dr. Cox's autopsy report and a review of numerous photographs of the victim and the crime scene. Williams disagreed, at least in part, with Cox's conclusion that Tammy had suffered a severe beating. Williams believed that perhaps Tammy's right leg had been fractured before death, and that some of her injuries may have been caused by being struck by a car and falling or lying on the gravel railroad bed. Additionally, Williams concluded that Tammy may have died due to suffocation rather than manual strangulation. However, Williams admitted on cross-examination that in this case, you have to think of manual strangulation. Absolutely. The jury found Biros guilty of all charges and specifications alleged in the indictment, with the exception of the offense charged in Count 3 of the indictment, which had previously been dismissed by the prosecution. Following a mitigation hearing, the jury recommended that Biros be sentenced to death for the aggravated murder of Tammy. The trial court accepted the jury's recommendation and sentenced Biros to death. Tommy Engstrom's sister, Debbie Heiss, spoke at a press conference in December 2006 and urged members of the community to write letters to the Attorney General urging that Biros's clemency plea be rejected. Kenneth Biros beat, tortured, sexually assaulted, mutilated, dismembered, and robbed Tammy with no remorse. He has been given more humanity and mercy from the state than my sister ever had. It's time for justice to be served. Debbie Heiss said, "Tammy was my sister and my best friend. She was raped. She was tortured for hours. She had to be so scared that night." In November 2009, Tammy's son Casey, who is now an adult, asked the Ohio Parole Board to reject clemency for his mother's murderer and fry Kenneth Biros. Casey Engstrom, who was only a year and a half old when his mother was murdered, asked his grandmother, Pat Engstrom, to deliver his message when she appeared before the parole board. Now a student in California. Casey also lost his father when he died about 4 years ago. Mary Jane Heiss. Tammy's mother sent a videotaped victim impact statement to the board. She told them how much stress the murder and the appeals process have put on her family. She pointed out that she has diabetes and uses a needle to take her insulin shots 4 times a day. She sees no need to revise the state's lethal injection protocol. Tammy Engstrom's family had already traveled to Lucasville to witness Biros's execution in 2007, only to learn that he had received a stay in order to present challenges to lethal injection procedures. 18 years after that cold February night, justice finally arrived. On December 8, 2009, Kenneth Biros became the first person in U.S. history to be executed using a single-drug lethal injection, a new method meant to end the era of botched executions. He ate his last meal. He apologized to Tammy's family. And then quietly, he was gone. The drug flowed, his breathing slowed, and after 10 minutes, it was over. For Tammy Engstrom's loved ones, the wait had been long, painful, and filled with memories that would never fade. But at last, they could whisper the one word they had waited nearly 2 decades to say: justice. Kenneth Biros's death marked more than the end of a killer. It marked a turning point in America's history of punishment, pain, and redemption. Because sometimes the story doesn't end with a scream. It ends with silence.